everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Flipping the Barrel, a podcast where we interview energy leaders in the space to uncover and find out more about their career and life journeys. Today, we have a fantastic leader that we've been wanting to interview for quite a while. And we've got Mr. Mike Holcomb, who is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Patterson-UTI since January of 2023. Mike joined Patterson-UTI in February of 1998. That can just tell you how long he's been around in the industry and his wealth of knowledge. He came through the acquisition of Robertson Onshore Drilling Company, and since that time has served numerous operational management roles, including as president of Patterson-UTI Drilling Company. Mike holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Management from LaTourneau University. We've gotten to know Mike off camera and off air, and he's just such a wonderful leader, someone that truly cares about his people, and you will see it in this interview. And so, Mike, thank you so much for sharing your day with us today and for sharing your story.
I really appreciate the opportunity, and hats off to you guys for the work that you're doing. Really appreciate the highlight on the people of the industry. I've got a lot of passion around that. And I think of my 35 plus years in the industry, probably the highlights for me are the people that I've encountered, the friends that I've made, and continuing to do that today. So look forward to spending some time chatting with you.
Well, I'm so glad that you addressed that, Mike, because that's exactly why we started this podcast, because we ourselves have been so impacted by the incredible people like you in the industry and just the incredible things that they've been able to give to the world. And we just felt like, those voices need to be heard. So let's jump into who you are, where you grew up. And we know that you're from Shreveport, Louisiana, which I know, of course, everybody now is like, oh yeah, he definitely gonna work in the oil field. He's Shreveport, Louisiana, and they probably assuming your dad worked in the oil field, but actually, your father worked in the drywall business, but your grandfather had a career in the oil field, working on a rig, which at a young age it really inspired you. The stories that he told you, and it kind of got you interested. But you ultimately decided to pursue a career in teaching. But to finance your education, you thought, you know what, I'm going to take a rig job because they pay well, and I'll finance my degree. And it was during this time that you really discovered what the oil field was about. Like you said, the incredible community, the wonderful people, the hardworking individuals, and it really aligned with your values. Can you elaborate on your childhood experience, with your grandfather, and also how this journey shaped you into the person that you are today?
Yeah, and I guess growing up, I didn't think that maybe that I was blessed because I had parents that expected you to work hard. And if I look back on life lessons, most of them always involved work. We didn't have allowances. If you needed money, you had to earn it. We had food and we had shelter and we had all the necessities, but if you wanted anything extra, then we were taught early, my brother and I, that you could work for it or you could decide not to have it. And I think back, and as I've gotten older and now that I have grandchildren, I probably pay more attention to the values that my parents instilled than I did when I was raising my own kids. I look back and I think you lose sight of that. And then as you go through life, it starts to connect why that was so important. And my brother and I, we were encouraged. We had a hay hauling business. My family we had a hay business. We would bale hay during the day and then we'd haul hay at night. And it's interesting. There's one person that I went to high school that hauled hay with us. We played football together, and he still works for me today. He's a rig manager for us in West Texas. So I've been working with this guy for 50 years. And so he and I are still close, and he's a great leader. And I run into people in class that have run across him out in the oil field or work on his rig, and they always say, "Hey, Carl Wayne says he taught you everything you know." Well, he taught me a lot. He really did. But and I think for me that's really a favorite time. I look back at some of the childhood friends that I had that ended up in this industry, and we've gone through a lot of life together. And we remain friends today. And then I've had the blessing of working still with a handful of people all these years later. So.
Thank you for sharing, Mike. It just truly shows, just even the fact that you have relationships still after 50 years, just the kind of person you are, and the fact that you always put people at the core of your business and of your leadership style. And so, to your point on speaking about your childhood and your mother, you spoke to us about the significance and influence that she had on both you and your brother. And you mentioned she's one of your greatest inspirations. You know, she was a single mother for a period of time, and she tirelessly just worked extremely hard for a better future for your brother and yourself. And can you tell us a little bit further of the impact that your mother has had on you, but also how you use that into your career and making your career successful with just the work ethic that she taught you?
You know, number one, she was the hardest working person that I've ever known. Mentally the toughest. She had a lot of, I mentioned when I was visiting you earlier, we lost my brother when he was 25 years old. I was 24. Watching her go through that, and then a lot of serious health issues, but never once did she ever complain, and she never had pity on herself. And growing up in that environment, she always treated us like we could do anything that we set our minds to. That was her expectation. She didn't give a lot of instructions on how to do something. She expected us to figure it out. And in growing up in that environment, I look back and how fortunate I was to have a mom and a dad that really instilled that work ethic. So I still use that today. The other thing that really shaped me is early on, no one had to send me to school to teach me that there should be, that women should have an equal opportunity in the workplace, because I grew up watching her scrap. I think I shared this story with you, but I can remember, I still have an article in the Tyler paper. We were living in Tyler, and there was a bank there called People's Bank. And I can remember she got promoted, and she was a vice president of lending at the bank. And the article in the newspaper said that she was the first girl to be promoted as vice president. And this was in the late 70s. Wow. So look how far we've come, because I think they wouldn't print that today. But back then that wasn't even offensive, and but looking at that, and for a lot of years as a child, I listened to her tell stories of how she trained her new boss. And because she didn't have a college degree, but she was very good at her job. And so I watched that, and so I've been a big proponent of having opportunities for females in the companies that I've worked at. And so, and I guess I'll share that is because, I grew up with it, and I watched how she was treated. And so hopefully we'll continue to make some progress there.
Wow, it's incredible just you reflecting on that story with your mom and the impact that she has in your life, and how what's very different about you is you saw that and you utilize it in today and in the workforce today, and how you are as a person. There's a lot of opportunities, people meet people or they have people in their lives, but do they utilize really what they learn, and do they then act on it? And you act on it, and you really do want that to happen. And you have seen it with your mom. And I think that that's really incredible, that for one, that during that time she was able to do that. And for two, for you to really understand that how important that was for her. So thank you for sharing. A lot of times during our life, we can run into people that really change our trajectory. You shared with us a time where you were working as a rig manager, and you never finished schooling at the time, and you randomly ran into the owner of the company, to your surprise, and he remembered you and remembered your application, and he pulled you aside and wanted to talk to you about, why didn't you finish, and what can we do to make a difference now for you in your life? Can you tell us about this encounter and kind of how it impacted you and what happened afterwards?
Yes, I'll if you'll give me a minute, I'll be quick, but I'll share the story. I had been promoted to a rig manager, and I got a phone call, and one of my buddies, back then he was about my age now, and he was on one of these truck mounted rigs, so it's built like a workover rig, and he was moving it down the road, and he broke down on the side of the road, and my rig was near there. So he called me to see if I could come help him. So I went there, and helping meant I crawled under there and I was taking the drive line out that was broken, and then I could hear him talking to someone, and I thought, well, this is great. His name was Boots. This is great. Boots called me over here to fix his rig, and now he's out there just chatting with this guy. And so I walk out and I've got grease all over me, and the guy sticks his hand out and he said, hey, my name is Doug Robertson. Are you one of the hands on this rig? And I said, well, no, actually, my name is Mike Holcomb, and I'm the rig manager on Rig 9. And he said, oh, I've been wanting to meet you. So we're visiting a little bit, and he said, hey, I saw on your application, and I'd been working there for a couple of years. He said, I remember on your application that you had some college. Have you ever thought about going back to school? And I made a comment like, I've got a wife and 2 kids at home, and I work 7 days a week. But we didn't have relief back then. You just worked every day. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm not sure how that's going to work for me. And he said, well, you should, if you figure it out, there's that word again. If you figure this out, let me know. I might can help. And so I went back to the rig, and and I ended up, he gave me his card. And so I called my wife and told her the story, and she said, well, you need to figure this out. And so I started researching, and this is when some of the adult education, alternative education, this was before the internet. You didn't have online classes, but LeTourneau University you could get a business degree, and take a couple of years and go 2 nights a week. And so he agreed to pay for half my education if I would make a B or better. And he would send someone to my rig and watch the rig while I went to class. So I would leave the rig, go to class for 4 hours, and then go back to the rig, get there about midnight. But back then, we were using roller cone bits, and you drilled a lot slower. It took a month to drill a well back then. And so I had a lot of time to do my homework. And so we had this guy that worked for us, his name was John. John would come relieve me on my rig, and I'd go to school 2 nights a week. I look back on that, and I think it actually worked out the way it should have, because I can tell you I was a lot better student that second time around than I was the first time. I mean, I understood that it mattered. Mm-hmm. And so, looking back on that, there's no question that meeting by chance that day, and I'm assuming that he probably would have said something to me at some point. But I look back, and it's probably one of a crossroad. You think about all the decisions, we make tens of thousands of decisions a day. That was one of the more impactful decisions of my career, I can assure you.
It's truly incredible how one person can influence your entire life, because if this encounter wouldn't have happened, maybe you wouldn't have never had the opportunity to go back to school and ever, become who you are today as, CEO of Patterson. And so it's incredible just the people that you meet and how someone can change your life. And I remember when you mentioned that story to us, you said that since then you've always wanted to give back as well. And so can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you've done as well for other gentlemen or women in your company who maybe didn't get that chance to study?
So yeah, we actually have a program now where we encourage people to go back and finish their degrees, and I've lost count, but we always have 1 or 2 individuals that have heard my story, and they want to know what they can do. So we have a program now where we encourage that. Even we have a leadership development program where we hire young engineers coming out of school that are. And we've got several tracks that you can go on, but one track, if you want to have an operations role, then we put you on a rig and you work every position on a rig. It's a 2-year rig-based program, and then it's another 2 years being district engineers. But we really target unconventional students, some that have worked while they were going to college, or maybe went back to school and they have some practical work experience, because we found Mike Garvin, who's the president of Patterson Drilling now. It's been my right-hand guy for the last 10 or 15 years, 12 years, I think. But, he has a similar story where he was working on a rig and went back to school during a downturn, got an engineering degree. And we just think that, young people that have had experienced life a little more, when they make that decision to go back to school, those decisions are demonstrating, good decision-making ability, good work ethic. And so we target that, and it's shame on me if I don't pay that back to some other people.
I do think that when you go back to school and you're a little bit older, you do definitely realize the commitment, and you realize, the other people around you, the success that they've had, who have have a degree that you might be pursuing. So I think you do have a different mindset for sure. When you attend school in either the second time or when you're a little bit older than right out of high school. Let's talk about leadership, because you're very passionate about this topic. I think it's funny. You even said that you would want to write a book titled Leadership for Dummies, which is, if it's not out there yet, maybe Mike will write it. But what I find very interesting about this is there's a lot of people that think like leaders leadership can be learned, or, are they born leaders? What's your perspective? And also what advice, like, how does, you're passionate about it, but how does one get the skill set that's needed, or what do you think is a good leadership style?
Well, so you had a few questions packed
Yes.
in. Struck a nerve. You're not born with it. You're born with DNA, and I think some people are more blessed than others in that category. I would be on the less blessed, other than, but in my mind, when you're born, you've got natural instincts. A young baby learns that he needs to feed himself. He doesn't even know how to cry. The doctor has to swat him on the rear end to make him cry to clean his lungs out. So that's not even natural. But then very quickly they learn to cry if they want something. And sometimes we've got grown people that still cry. Maybe I do that some too. But I think from there, it's all about development. So you're born with natural instincts, and then obviously some people have amazing minds, some people have amazing passions. Everybody has different strengths but it really starts from a development standpoint. And so I benefited from having parents that understood hard work and high character people that treated people right and treated people fairly and expected the same. So I was raised that way. That lends itself pretty good to leadership. But here at Patterson, we've got some really good leadership development programs for frontline leaders. Because I look back and when you hire young people into the workforce, you're just taking a chance on what their experiences have been. And a lot of times it's been they played sports and they had a coach. And no offense to the coaching profession, but just because you're a really good coach does not mean you're a good leader. And you're not teaching leadership. You just bark at people and blow a whistle and make them do it, or they're off the team. So that doesn't really work. Military's got some good leadership training, in Boy Scouts. And for me, I was really involved in FFA. There's really good leadership training there. But if you're a company the size of Patterson, or the company that we work for, you really have to control your own destiny. So we've got some frontline leadership and it's built around high character individuals. We really teach our company core values in this leadership, and it's all built on a trust model. And then there's a coaching model for frontline leaders of how do you get people to do what you ask them to do. And it's really, you build trust, be a person of high character, and then you set a clear expectation of what you want. You provide feedback on how it's going, and then there's accountability along with it. And if you can complete those three tasks, it's pretty straightforward for a frontline leader. And I think that model works as you move up through the ranks. And so it's I think, just being a person, and trust is the absolute foundation. If people trust you, then they'll do a lot for you. I don't know if
So
I
Mike,
question or not, but
no, you answered it perfectly. And so we're waiting for Leadership for Dummies, which will be coming out soon. No pressure. But on that topic of leadership, you shared a powerful statement when we first interviewed you off air. And you said, if you do not care about your people, you should simply not be a leader. And, we totally agree and resonate with this. And, to your point, there's a lot of managers and people in positions of leadership, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're true leaders just because you have a title. And you mentioned you had this story where a team member of yours, one of the managers working for you, came for you seeking guidance, and he wanted the secret recipe of how does Mike get people to follow him? How does Mike get people to do things for him? Because he had noticed just how your team really truly wanted to help you in any way, shape, or form, or go above and beyond for you. And he wanted that for his team. And so he went to you of like, give me the magic recipe. And you said that at the end of the day is they know that you love them. And when you mentioned that, I was like, wow, I've never heard anybody say that. And so can you elaborate a little bit maybe on that story and what you mean by your team needs to know that you love them?
Yeah, this guy, Harbin Jordan, he still works for me today. And we had him, he's in a leadership development role. He was a rig manager for us, did a phenomenal job. And so we identified him as a high potential employee, brought him to Houston, put him in the development. And I think early on, and Harbin's this way anyway, he's very smart. He's valedictorian of a very large high school. So smart guy. And he writes everything down. And so he came in my office and he was because he'd been out doing audits and quality audits for us. And he came back and he said, I've been all over the country, and everywhere I go, people ask about you. And he said, these guys will do anything for you. He said, what is it about that? And I just like, well, it's simple. They know I love them. And he just looked at me real strange. He said, what? I said, they know I love them, Harbin. It's not hard. This is the whole concept of the leadership for dummies. If you're a person of high character that can be trusted, and if you care about your people, they will do anything for you. I mean, anything. And it really is that simple. But you can't betray that. You've got to be trustworthy and you've got to really care. And I can remember when Mr. Patterson retired in 2006 and I moved to West Texas, and we had some leadership training. We had some coaches. And I thought it was strange. And back then I still didn't have it all figured out, but people would just say, they would be talking about me and I walk in the room and they would say things, and it almost bothered me. They would say, well, he leads with his heart. And I was like, well, what does that even mean? Like, you mean I've just got my feelings on my sleeve or what? And because this is the drilling business, right? And then I guess I just didn't understand that maybe that was a different way of doing things. And so one of the things that I think over time that I'm proud of is that within our company, we do have compassionate leaders that care about their people. And when people are in need, there's a long line of people ready to live. And I think the industry is more that way than probably people realize. I think, I've made a couple comments in the past that, the oil field has too many bosses and not enough leaders. And I think we're changing that ratio over time. I actually think that most companies that I'm familiar with are doing a really good job at developing leadership. And if you're compassionate about people, they see that and they recognize it.
Yeah, I would have to say and align with what you're saying, Mike, because, with the age of social media and everybody wanting that clear transparency and to understand their leaders, that's going to be a requirement. Empathy is going to be key in any leader. And if they don't have it, I think it's going to be a struggle. But there is a thing to this, though, that I would find more difficult for somebody like yourself, who everybody does love you and they know that you love them back. But with the industry, there's a lot of downturns, and it's very especially in the rig industry. I mean, I remember seeing all those rigs stacked when we had that massive downturn, and, West Texas was just like, you didn't even know if it was going to survive. And at the time you have to lay people off. So, what advice do you have for those that, get into the industry, they feel like this might happen? And how have you been able to, muster through this hard time that the industry always does, unfortunately have, but especially coming from somebody who is so passionate, who is such a leader, who people know, love them, the relationship is mutual. Saying bye is very hard.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not an easy task, and we have these cycles, but in our business, in the contract drilling business, for example, labor is about 2/3 of our cost on a rig. And if you're not earning revenue and you get 20 or 30% of your rigs down, you can go broke really quick. So I've always been swift to take action. The thing that I've always done has been totally honest with people. I've seen people that maybe the rig doesn't have another job And I've seen rig managers willing to lie to their crews and say they've got other work because they're afraid they're going to quit. That is a no. Never, ever, under any circumstances, is it okay to lie to your employees about their future. That's just a cardinal sin. You know, the things that you can't do with rough, I'll say roughnecks, and I'm gonna use that word. That's a term of endearment because that's who I am. But don't be late on my check. Don't short pay me, and don't lie to me.
Mhm.
You know, and so be honest with people, make decisions, be fair about your decisions, and be consistent, and just know that it's not in your control. That's just your job. And I think people respect that, you know, and I can remember, I'll share a story real quick. We have a rig up facility here in Houston, and the industry was terrible, but we had contracts on some new rigs. And so the people in the yard were still working. And we were having a team building meeting one day, and I came down and I said, hey, if anybody has questions, and the response back from our director there said, well, you may not want to ask questions because they're going to ask about, are there going to be layoffs? And I said, well, that's fine. They can ask whatever they want. And so sure enough, I'm in front of the room, it's about 40 people in there. And this one gentleman raised his hand. He said, well, I have a question. Are we going to be impacted by this downturn? And I said, we're going to all be impacted by this downturn. And then he kind of, you know, snickered and said, yeah, that's easy for you to say, you're not going to be. And I said, well, let me tell you a little story. This was in 2016. So you know what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, when I was your age, it was common to get laid off 2 or 3 times a year. You know, and I roofed houses, I cut firewood, I built fence, I did drywall work. I mean, I did whatever was necessary, and I never lost a night's sleep over it. I just found me something to do, and I hustled, and I never missed a house payment or a car payment. And I said, but let me tell you what happened this year. My son was working for Lufkin Industries. My son-in-law was working for H&P, and they both got laid off. I've lost many nights of sleep over that one. That broke my heart when they got laid off. And the guy said, well, I feel like I stuck my foot in my mouth. I said, no, you had a question. And I gave you an answer. But yes, it does affect us all. And I said, plus the decisions that leaders have to make. One of these days you'll be in a leadership position and you'll understand the burden of that. You will. But I think if you just, you know, have integrity, be honest with people, be compassionate about it, and then do what you can. But never, ever. I mean, if you tell someone you're going to have work for them, they may turn down a job tomorrow based on what you told them. And if they find work, be happy for them and get someone else to fill in for them. So that's my spiel on, you know, from there where it gets more difficult, if people have made decisions that require you to have to terminate them for cause, again, be respectful. Don't terminate out of anger. Understand they made a poor choice. Does not make them a bad person. And I've got a lot of those folks that I still get happy birthday texts from and Merry Christmas, and because the relationships will outlast those decisions if you do it with respect. So that's my coaching for people. It doesn't. Every downturn we've had, I've always said it's going to be my last. So it is hard. My wife hates it because, you know, we grew up around Tyler, Texas. That's the capital of where rig workers come from worldwide. And so we know a lot of people that work for us, and she gets a lot of calls from her friends, and can you do anything for my son? And, you know, it's hard. It's hard for both of us.
I really like that you shared that story and truly just transparent about the situations that have happened. And you're right, the oil and gas industry is cyclical, and we all just have to be prepared for it. And I really enjoyed that you mentioned about don't lie to your people, be very transparent, integrity, honesty, because at the end of the day, you will have an upcycle and you will have to hire most of the people that you laid off. It is what it is. We've seen it. We lay off and we have to hire back. And to your point, it's how they got laid off and how that message came across and that empathy from that leader that will determine whether they want to come work with you again or not. So I really like that you shared that, because it does come around, and it's very important to keep those relationships no matter what happened, whether it was a termination or a layoff. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's super important for the people in this industry to hear that. And we had another question on mentorship. This is something that a lot of people ask leaders about. I'm sure throughout your 30+ year career, you've had several mentors or even sponsors within a company. In order to advance, I think it's crucial to have a mentor, just somebody that you can learn from. Can you share a little bit about the importance of mentorship, and maybe for those who have no idea how to get a mentor, how do they come about finding one?
So what I would, if there's some young people that are going to ultimately watch this interview, the thing that I would encourage people to do is that you decide who you would like to be a mentor, and it can be very informal. There doesn't have to be a program to have a mentor, but you watch people and you see everywhere you work, there's people that you look up to and you think, wow, this person does a great job. This person's high character, and just start spending time with them, create opportunities, and then say, hey, look, there's things that I would like to bounce off of you from time to time, and I'm not going to be a big burden on you, but I would like for you to mentor me on things. And if you pick the people, I promise you they will be willing to do that. Because it's encouraging for leaders for someone to ask. And so to me, that's part of active leadership.